Now, if you're out looking for a home and you're searching on the internet, the buzzwords right now are lease purchase, lease option, and rent to own. But are these a viable option to help you to get to home ownership? In this video, we're going to discuss the possibilities and pros and cons for lease options and rent to own properties. So you're going to want to watch, pay attention, watch this video. Hey everybody, it's Otis McAlaster with Keller Realty Roanoke and the Hogan Home Team, your knowledge broker for buying and selling in the Blue Ridge. And today I want to talk to you about the possibility of buying a home via a vehicle that's being utilized quite a bit. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of it, and I'm gonna go on record right off and tell you that I'm not a fan of it. Not necessarily to say that it doesn't work. However, most of the time it's not favorable to the people that are involved in it. And sometimes it's not favorable even to the seller. And we're going to talk about a couple of those things too. But we're talking about lease purchase, lease option, or rent to own. Now, lease purchase or lease options are agreements that are commonly referred to as lease to own or rent to own. And these terms are sort of interchangeable. And sometimes they will use different terms, but basically for all intents and purposes, they're talking about the same thing. Now, these agreements allow a potential buyer to occupy a seller's property for a period of time before becoming an owner of that property. And depending on the exact terms of what is agreed upon, that will kind of tell you exactly how each one of those things works. Now, the arrangement on most of these, they offer both parties the opportunity to achieve their goals, one of which obviously the seller is to sell his property and for the buyer to buy a property. And in theory, they should be mutually beneficial. However, if you're not very careful and if you're not very on it when it comes to understanding what the terms are, it can be very unfavorable for buyers most of the time, and sometimes for sellers as well. And so it is very, very important for you to understand exactly how these things work. Now, I am not an attorney, and I'm not trying to represent any type of legal information or give you any kind of legal advice. However, I have seen a lot of horror stories with regards to lease option, lease purchase, and rent to own properties. I'm going to share some of that information with you, and I'm going to allow you to come to your own conclusions. So that being said, I'm going to try to give you some pros and cons about lease option, lease purchase, and rent to own. So first of all, let's address what I would like to call the elephant in the room with regards to lease option, lease purchase, and rent to own properties. And that is, why would a seller want to do this option as opposed to simply selling their property outright? You would think that an outright sale would be a lot less hassle, it would be a lot more straightforward and non-convoluted. And in actuality, that would be true. For all intents and purposes, a straightforward sale is a whole lot less complicated. But one of the biggest issues for real estate owners is stagnating property. That's property that is not selling at the asking price of the owner. Okay? So even in a hot market, there are properties that for one reason or another, maybe they're asking too much for the property, maybe there are issues with the property that have come out, and now these issues are known. If you're a realtor and you happen to be listing a property and there are issues with that property, then you have a fiduciary responsibility to tell those that are interested in the property what you know about that property. So now these things could result in that property not selling under normal circumstances. Now this could be the result of different factors, such as, again, high asking price, or low demand, or an unstable economy, or issues with the property, as I said before. For real estate owners and potential buyers, there comes an investing solution that can be beneficial to both, and that is where they came up with this idea of lease option and lease purchase and rent to own. However, that option is more favorable to the seller than it is to the buyer. Now, that's my opinion. However, I believe I have information that I'm going to give that's going to kind of fortify that. So it gives an owner a chance to make a profit on the investment while renting to a potential buyer. For a tenant, it's going to give them a lease, but the chance of them owning that property after a few years is actually not as great as you might think. Even in a straightforward lease where there's nothing underhand and everything is above board and everything is good to go, the actual statistics favor that most people do not exercise the option at the end of their term. So that means that most of those properties actually go back to the owner. So now, if that's what's happening, then my question to you would be, how is this advantage to the buyer? So let's talk about lease options and lease purchases. Now, for the most part, again, when you see these online, when you're searching and you're looking at homes, for the most part, people are using these terms interchangeably. And so it's very, very important that you understand what that person is talking about when they say lease purchase or when they say lease option. So that way you make sure that you have a good understanding of what kind of a contract or a contractual agreement that you're entering into. Because in a serious situation or in a standard definition, lease options and lease purchases are in fact not the same thing. Now, a lease purchase, generally speaking, consists of two contracts: the leasing contract and the purchase contract. That leasing contract is generally for a specific period of time. Sometimes in a lease purchase, the leasing contract can be the same amount of time as the purchase contract. At the end of the lease contract, the purchase contract is executed and the person is expected to meet whatever terms are set about in that contract in order to be able to buy the property. Now, in a general sense, in a lease purchase, the leasee is obligated to buy the property. So this is different than a lease option. Again, now in a lease option, there's also going to be two contracts: the leasing contract and also the sales contract. However, in the lease option, the seller, or excuse me, the buyer is not obligated at the end of that contract to exercise the option to buy the property. Now, so one of the big differences is between, generally with a lease option, what they are expecting is for that buyer to be able to secure some type of conventional financing, either a conventional loan or an FHA loan or some other type of government loan, or if they've got, let's say they have situations with their credit or some kind of financial situation that they need to overcome first. That term of that lease is going to give them the opportunity and the amount of time that they feel is necessary for them to get over the hump and to get past that hurdle, to get their credit score up to what it needs to be, or to pay off debts and get their debt to credit ratio down to what it needs to be, or whatever the situation is that they're trying to overcome, so that at the end of that lease term, they can exercise the option to buy the property. And so in a straightforward sense, those all sound like really good things. However, there are some things that you need to pay attention to. In many lease purchases, the amount that you put down as the deposit in some lease purchases is non-refundable. Secondly, the amount that you put down for a down payment in many instances is higher than a standard down payment for when you're renting a property, because their incentive is, hey, you're going to buy the property, so we're going to ask you for, instead of, let's say if the rent was $700, and so you'd put down the first month's rent and a deposit generally equal to the monthly rent, $700, it's $1,400, you put down $1,400. However, if you're going to exercise a purchase, they want you to have some skin in the game. So they may ask you for a little bit higher than that. Let's say they may ask you for $3,000 or $5,000, whatever they feel like they can get. Because when a person puts up that kind of down payment, it kind of lets them know this person is serious about trying to buy the property. And so again, the down payment or the amount that you're going to put up as a deposit is generally higher than what you'd put up in a standard lease or standard rental situation. And in many instances, that amount that you put up is not refundable. Now, there's some legal, mumbo jumbo that goes with that, and so you're going to be very, very careful about the wording and the verbiage that's in that contract in order to protect yourself. Because again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not trying to give you any legal advice. However, you got to be real careful, because this is what gets people, and they feel like that someone took advantage of them, when the truth is that they didn't know, or they didn't pay attention to what kind of a contract they were getting to in the first place. So lease option, lease purchase, that's kind of an overview, generalized overview. You can go online, you can search these terms, you can read a lot. There's a lot of posts out there that differentiate between the two, gives you pros and cons, but I'm kind of trying to give you a surface understanding. With regard to rent to own, it's pretty self-explanatory. The only difference with rent to own is a lot of times there's not really a purchase contract, there's sort of a leasing contract. Rent to own in many instances is kind of like owner financing. It'd be almost better if they just said owner financing straight out, but a lot of folks like to use that term rent to own because it kind of has a context that, hey, I can help you if you have bad credit or whatever the situation is, and so it kind of pulls people, catches them with that hook, and they get involved in it, and sometimes it just doesn't turn out very well. One of the main things that I think you need to recognize is, in most of these situations, whatever you pay during the month, you're not going to get any credit for. That's not going to be reported to the credit bureaus. None of them, in most situations. And so whatever you pay, you're not helping yourself from a credit standpoint. You're not getting any credit for the payments that you pay. And this, in my opinion, doesn't really help you any. Again, there can be situations where this is beneficial, but in the long run, for what I have seen, most of the time, it doesn't work out that way. So I'm not really trying to be the doom crier in this situation, and I know some of you may look at this and feel like, oh man, he's just talking real bad about it, and I thought this was a good idea, and blah blah blah. And I'm not really trying to talk you out of it. If you're down to do it, then I just like you to have as much information as possible. So I am going to tell you of some perceived advantages that you might find as a buyer for a lease option. Okay, so most of the time, the lease option payments can be applied toward the purchase price of the property. And now this is a beneficial strategy for buyers because they have the option to continue renting or buying, but the seller cannot sell the property to anyone else should the buyer decide to buy it. So that kind of gives you a lock on the property if you do decide to exercise your option to buy. Okay, so some other advantages would be that a lease option is sort of an exciting prospect for a tenant that is kind of short on cash or unable to qualify for a mortgage. This is going to give the buyer time to prepare, to get a down payment, or to prepare by improving their credit ratings for a mortgage excuse me, before the purchase date. Okay, so now purchase price for the property is usually agreed upon at the signing of the agreement, and this is an advantage because if prices happen to go up, their price is locked in, and so you can avoid additional costs of appreciation on the property after a number of years, depending on how long you decide to make the term of the contract. Okay, so now lease to own can act as a trial period for the buyer. If the buyer is new in town, or if the buyer is relocating, this allows him to kind of test that particular neighborhood or test that particular property for its investment value. If the buyer is relocating and waiting to sell a property and his own property hasn't sold yet, then it gives him the opportunity to be in a property, and then if his property doesn't sell, then he's not locked into buying that one, and if his property does sell, well, then he can exercise his option to buy that property, or he can say, hey, I found something that's better over here, and he can decide that he wants to do that. So it allows them the opportunity to get settled in at their home until they are able to purchase completely or move and go somewhere else. So those are some of the advantages. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages. So now lease to owns do not make the buyer the owner of the property, even though you're leasing it, and even though in your mind you know you're going to buy it, and so you got that mindset, this is going to be my house, and you're walking around like you own the place, but you don't. The property still belongs to the seller, and it will still be the seller's until you exercise that option or until you take advantage of buying that property. And so that owner still has full control of that property. It might be a minor issue, but the buyer may feel like a tenant rather than a homeowner, okay? Another thing is that it might not work out because the buyer might not be able to improve their credit, or they might not be able to save money for a down payment, or any of a number of other issues. And if those issues come into play, the terms of that contract may not be in your best interest. As we said before, you could lose your down payment. You could, you're not going to build any equity in the property. Now, there's some folks that have tried to fight that in court, and there can be sometimes language that can allow them to suggest that there is equity in the property. And again, that's kind of above my pay grade. That's more of a legal issue, and you're going to want to talk to a lawyer about that. But in a lot of cases, it doesn't work out that way. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you know, it works against the buyer. So that's kind of as far as pros and cons, those are probably about the best that I can give you. Now, there may be some other folks that have some other issues and some other things that they might tell you. Hey, you know what? They may know some things that I don't know, and that's fine. But that is the way I see it as far as that is concerned. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt and be very, very careful. So now, here's the bottom line. It'd be impossible to say that any one of these approaches really is better than the other. Everyone's situation and ultimate goals are different. So it really kind of depends which approach is best for you. Don't go blindly with any one of these rules of thumb. Truth is, all of them have a potential for success, and equally, all of them have a potential for disaster if you choose the wrong one. You need to be honest with yourself and to take all the variables of your particular situation into account. There are also other things that you need to consider when you're purchasing a home, such as how much down payment do you need, or how much down payment can you afford? You need to think about things like moving costs, or furniture, or appliances, or closing costs, and there's a whole lot more. And these things can make it very, very tough to make any one of these methods a fast rule over any of the other ones. So now your best option is to get professional advice from someone that you trust. My suggestion to you would be to have a buyer needs analysis done. With a buyer needs analysis, you can figure out exactly what method may work best for you. You can also plan exactly how to get where you are right now to home ownership. And you might possibly be able to circumvent the down payment situation with some of the loan options that are available to you. Since we work with a lot of different lenders, we can help you to figure out which loan is best and which lender might be the best one for you. So now, if you'd like to find out more information about how to find out how much home you can afford, or you have questions about buying or selling a home anywhere in Virginia, please reach out to me or one of my associates at the Hogan Home Team, and we'd be happy to help you. My name is Otis McAlaster, and I'm with the Hogan Home Team for Keller Realty Roanoke, your knowledge broker for buying and selling in the Blue Ridge. And I'll see you later.